And we're returning to Wise Child by Monica Furlong, the sixth chapter, which is called Flying. And I paused just as Juniper's teacher had come to the house. Juniper and Wise Child had made something that smelled very bad, and Juniper asked Wise Child, did she trust her enough to do something that would be painful but would be good for her in the end. Now, Wise Child's just been woken up by a hand on her shoulder, and we come to a part of the book that I remember very well from reading it when I was 12, 13 years old. So let's pick up from there. Hours later, it seemed the hand clutched my shoulder and I woke up in fright. "Get up!" said Uni's voice, not unsympathetically. "Come downstairs." "What for?" I asked, trying to still a feeling of terror in my heart. "Don't ask questions. Nimmock will tell you." I got up with a heavy heart and shuffled to the stairs, stony with sleep. Downstairs, Juniper had prepared a bath for me in front of the fire. I thought she must have gone mad. "Take off your clothes, Wise Child," she said heavily. "In front of Uni?" I said incredulously. My people did not let others see them naked very much. Juniper nodded. She looked unusually pale and tired, I noticed, not her usual rosy and cheery self. Very slowly I stripped off my smock and the shirt I wore beneath it, and stepped into the warm water with an ominous sense of strangeness. You did not wake people up in the middle of the night to give them baths, particularly when you'd forgotten to give them any supper. Juniper lifted me out of the water into the big fluffy cloth she always used to wipe me dry after a bath, and for a moment, warm in her arms, I thought maybe everything was all right. But then I felt a stiffening in her body and was aware over my shoulder her eyes were fixed on something. I glanced around quickly, and there was Uni coming towards us, staggering under the big bowl of beeswax and herbs. I shrank toward Juniper, uncertain of what was going to happen. Wise Child, said Juniper, and she seemed to have a catch in her throat. "It is necessary for us to use this ointment. It is a way of showing you something. I know you won't like the idea, but bear with us. We won't hurt you." I didn't speak because I could not for the life of me think what they were going to do with the stuff. What they did was stand me on the cloth in front of the fire, and then both of them dipped their hands into the foul mess in the bowl and advanced toward me. They started smearing it on my naked body. "No!" I yelled as I realized what they intended to do, and caught the disgusting whiff of the ointment all over again. "Be patient, Wise Child," said Juniper in her gentlest voice. "Hold still, child," Uni said crossly. By now they were covering my legs, my thighs, my heels, even the soles of my feet. It felt disgustingly greasy. Soon it was all over my arms, my hands. I could see myself in the mirror as a tiny brown figure with an anguished white face at the top. But then Uni seized my hair and started rubbing the stuff, not at all gently, into my scalp and into my ears. My hair stood up in greasy tufts, but soon that too was covered with the slimy ointment and stuck like a cap on my head. Meanwhile, Juniper very gently was smearing the stuff across my forehead, my chin, my cheeks, my nose, and all around my eyes. She was careful not to get any into my eyes, but it scarcely mattered. The terrible stench of it made them smart in water. Juniper and Uni laid the cloth on my tiny green chair and advised me to sit down, and in utter misery I did so. I felt ravaged, desolate beyond words, as if my body was hateful, an enemy to me. I was a tiny knot of misery and wretchedness. Angry and frightened as I was, I somehow could not stop myself from turning to Juniper, trying to seek some clue in her face about the hateful thing that had overtaken me. She sat very close beside me, looking at me with great tenderness, and I tried to tell her what I was feeling. "I don't understand," I said to her, weeping, and I could see it cut her to the heart. But there was no time for more conversation. As my warm body melted some of the ointment, the stench grew intolerable, and I could feel the sickness from my empty stomach. Broken with faintness and nausea, I leaned my head against the arm of Juniper's chair, too ill now to wonder or do anything but helplessly surrender. Suddenly, I thought I saw something out of the corner of my eye, and turned my head quickly. It was as if a piece of the roof had come right off, and I could see the sky and the stars through it. I sat up and stared hard at it, aware of both Juniper and Uni watching me closely. But there was more of the sky. Then there was more of the sky. I could see that the roof had now rolled all the way back, and shining there in the heavens was a huge orange hunter's moon. I was no longer aware now of the stench nor of the greasy clutch of the ointment. I suddenly realized that I was weightless. I was beginning to move upward. "Wait a moment, wise child," Juniper shouted at me, grabbing me by the hand. She walked across the room, holding on to me. I half flew across the floor, and she bent and handed me the hazel broom. I jumped astride it. I also heard her say, "Go, Pearl." Pearl leaped onto the handle of the broom. Juniper let go, and I flew up into the luminous moon-filled sky. I managed to seat myself quite comfortably on the fattest part of the broom. Pearl crouched at full length, facing the way we were going, directing us. I was high up, high over the house and the cliff and the meadow and the bog and the village. I could see Cormac's little hut in the meadow, brilliant in the moonlight, and I could see the sea away in the distance, with a path of moonbeams riding upon it. I noticed that the roof seemed to be back on Juniper's house again. I did not feel at all cold. Then, as if gathering speed, the broom turned sharply and headed for the sea and the mainland. Soon I was passing the huge peaks, and I could see the crevices and corries, the valleys and steep rock faces perfectly clearly. Beneath us was what I knew to be the great glen, with its necklace of locks. We flew on for some minutes, and then we were over the sea again. It was colder now, but the air was deliciously fresh upon me. My skin shone white in the moonlight, without any trace of the brown ointment that had disfigured it. Pearl glowed brightly ahead of me, the moon irradiating her brilliant fur. Once or twice I thought I heard her speak to me, but decided I must have imagined it. I was trying desperately to remember what Juniper had taught me in her geography lessons. What was it that lay on the far side of the cold sea? I could not remember. Soon, however, I began to see a group of islands below us, and realized that the broom was going down. It travelled at quite a steep angle, and I felt indignant that I had not sensibly been holding on tight. I felt indignant that if I had not sensibly been holding on tight, I might have fallen off at once, though I remembered Juniper's laughing remark to me on the way home from that day in the bog. "You always feel someone must be to blame when you are cold or miserable or frightened, wise child. It may not be so at all. It is just the weather of life, but even if they are to blame, does it matter?" The island on which we were coming down was a mountainous place. I could see a circle of stones, with another avenue of stones leading up to them. The broomstick dropped me at the end of the avenue, farthest from the circle. It was odd to feel my bare feet on cold turf, and for a moment I was dizzy from the flying. Then Pearl set off ahead of me at a dignified pace, waving her tail high in the air. Leaving the broom on the ground, I followed her. The stones were huge in the moonlight. There seemed to be total silence, as if the living creatures were intently watching, and the moon was very large, bigger than I ever remembered it. I found myself trying to match the quietness around me, putting my feet down on the wet grass as carefully as if I were stalking a wild beast. But what filled me was a sense of enormous reverence. Philin had once told me how the Christians in times past walked to the altar barefoot to receive the sacrament. What sacrament was I about to receive? All my senses were very sharp. I was aware of the scent of the plants and the grasses I crushed beneath the soles of my feet, of the air gently touching my naked body, of the blood pulsing in and out of my heart, of the passage of food far down in my belly. At once I knew that the movement of the blood within me was part of the same pattern that moved the sap in the oak tree to my right. The decay of the food in my stomach was the same as the autumn decay of the plants and trees when Juniper and I shoved earth upon our human droppings. I knew that the flies and the little earth creatures fed upon them. This was their food, as the fish and the animals and the roots and the berries and the seeds were ours. I began to weep at the beauty of this. to say a psalm that Filion had once taught me, praising the good God. I was now emerging from the avenue and into a circle of much bigger stones, which made me feel as tiny as an ant. I also felt very dignified, like someone walking in a procession. I walked even more slowly over the short, tussocky grass. Pearl led me through the outer circle, through 2 concentric inner ones, and at last the 2 of us were in a clearing with one flat stone in the middle of it, like an altar. Pearl walked ahead of me to this stone, and there she stopped, and the 2 of us stood side by side. I felt nonplussed. "What do you want of me?" I asked the altar stone at last. I was not very surprised when it didn't reply, though I asked the question 3 times. All the same, I knew that one day that place would teach me the answer. I stood there for a bit. I suppose praying is the word for what I was doing, to God, to Christ, to that special magic place, to the wild world about me, to St. Bridget, St. Michael, to Columba, to Finbar, to Juniper, my most intimate saints. I was roused from this reverie by Pearl brushing herself against my legs. I looked behind me in the direction in which she was facing, and I could see what looked like a shiny ball approaching us down the avenue, about 2 feet from the ground. Only when it reached the last of the stone circles did I recognize it for what it was: Juniper's broom. It circled me several times as if impatient to be off, and at last I realized that I had to run to catch up with it and jump upon it. Pearl and I jumped at the same moment, and the broom at once shot upwards in its sudden, inconsiderate way. Once again I felt very cross and wanted to blame somebody. And we made our way into the grey dark of the sky. As if the business of the evening was over, I thoroughly enjoyed the ride back, feeling the wind rushing through my hair, noticing the autumn constellations which seemed to be very close, the cheese moon, the luminosity of the sky, which was not dark at all, but patched with different colours of light. Nearer to home I noticed the branches of trees, which had a strange jewel quality, and the grass of the meadow surging softly like a sea beneath me. Then, with a shock that made my head spin, I was sitting in my little green chair with Juniper and Eunie seated beside me, and the disgusting smell of the ointment in my nostrils, and the roof back on the house. "Come," said Juniper with her old certainty and brusqueness, "I'm going to give you another bath." In fact, 2 baths were waiting beside the hearth. I was cold and shivering, so I was glad to have Juniper help me into the first of the baths. I stumbled and fell like a drunken man. She carefully washed away the filthy ointment and bathed my sticky hair. This took quite a lot of work. Then she lifted me clear from one bath to the other. Eunie bore away the first bath and the terrible smell with it, and this bath was full of sweet-smelling herbs, and here the last traces of the ointment were washed away. Juniper wrapped me in a clean cloth and dried me on her lap, and then carried me, big girl as I was, up the stairs and placed me in her own bed. I was so sleepy that I only faintly knew it when she eventually climbed into the bed beside me, and I did not wake again until morning. And that's the end of chapter 6.